Life as a medieval archer was incredibly difficult physically, mentally, and in every conceivable way. It wasn't simply about the skill of shooting arrows. It was about enduring a profession that demanded everything and offered little in return. The real question wasn't whether it was challenging, but whether one could withstand its rigors. When medieval monarchs enacted archery laws, they weren't issuing casual recommendations. They were ordering every able-bodied male between the ages of 7 and 60 to practice with a longbow every Sunday after church. Skip practice, and you faced a fine or time in the stocks. Imagine being a 10-year-old child, handed a bow nearly as tall as yourself, and told to pull it back not once or twice but hundreds of times until your small hands were covered in blisters and bleeding. The adults around you showed no concern for your tears or complaints. Their logic was brutal but simple. If you couldn't draw the bow, you were useless in battle. Your first bow might be smaller, but by the age of 12 or 13, you were expected to handle the standard longbow. That standard longbow required a level of strength that would impress even the most muscular modern athlete. Training wasn't solely focused on hitting targets. It was about building the extraordinary upper body strength needed to repeatedly draw a bow, requiring over 100 pounds of force, while other children engaged in play. Young archers spent hours pulling weights, lifting stones, and repeating the same motion thousands of times until their bodies were physically transformed. Evidence of this brutal childhood training is still visible today in skeletal remains, showing unusual bone deformities, twisted spines, and bone spurs on fingers from years of constant strain. Examinations of medieval graves have revealed archer remains with left arm bones 50% thicker than their right. Their bodies were literally shaped by their profession by the age of 16. Successful trainees could fire up to 12 arrows per minute with accuracy at 200 yards. Their fingers bore permanent grooves and calluses so thick a needle couldn't penetrate them, which was probably for the best, as medieval medicine primarily involved applying dirt to wounds and returning to practice. The worst part, this childhood of pain was just the beginning. After years of rigorous training, you might assume an archer would cherish their weapon. The reality was far more complex. The English longbow was both a marvel of medieval warfare and a persistent source of physical hardship. First, its sheer size, standing between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet 6, often matched or exceeded the height of its user. Crafted from wood, it weighed only 3 to 5 pounds, but after miles of marching, that weight became noticeable. The true brutality lay in its draw force. Recovered bows reveal draw weights between 90 and 180 pounds, 2 to 3 times the force required for modern hunting bows. Imagine lifting a medium-sized dog with 3 fingers, then repeating that action 400 times in an afternoon. There was no technique to make it easier, just raw muscle power. The toll on the body was devastating. Archer skeletons show enlarged bones, compressed spines, and severe arthritis. Some developed such massive bone spurs on their drawing hands that they must have lived in constant pain. Yet they continued shooting. Maintenance was another challenge. Hemp or flax bowstrings required regular waxing and had to be kept dry. Spare strings were carried wrapped around the head beneath helmets. The bow itself, if stored improperly, would warp and become useless. Even well-maintained bows had limited lifespans, sometimes breaking after hours of intense battle. Arrows had to be carefully matched to the bow. Too light, and they lacked power. Too heavy, and their flight would be inaccurate. A skilled archer could fire 10 to 12 arrows per minute, adjusting instinctively for distance and wind. Archery wasn't merely a skill, it was a way of life. Daily practice was compulsory, and entire companies faced fines for taking a single day off. Some archers referred to their bows as their wives, experiencing both love and resentment toward them. One archer, caught drinking excessively, defended himself by stating that his bow demanded everything from him. So, in the evenings, the aim was his alone. As demanding as this relationship was, the bow was only the initial component of an archer's burden. Traveling light was not an option for medieval archers. When summoned to war, they carried enough equipment to strain a modern soldier. Their burden encompassed not just the emotional weight of impending conflict, but the significant physical weight of survival tools strapped to their backs, hanging from their belts, and slung across their shoulders. The longbow itself was just the beginning. 6 feet tall and up to 5 pounds, it was challenging to carry. But without arrows, it was merely an awkwardly shaped walking stick, and arrows were not designed for easy transport. A standard war archer carried 60 to 100 arrows, representing 7 to 12 pounds of sheer pointed inconvenience. These were not neatly arranged quivers like in films. Most archers carried arrows at their hip, stuffed them into boots, or simply stuck them into the ground, hoping no one would trip. Running out of ammunition mid-battle was a death sentence, so archers carried materials to produce more: extra arrowheads, feathers, and wooden shafts. The more prepared individuals had emergency fletching kits, because nothing adds to battlefield stress like attempting arts and crafts under fire. The bowstring presented another issue. Rain caused hemp strings to stretch, so archers carried at least 3 backups wrapped in wax cloth. Some tucked spares into pouches, others into their helmets. A few reportedly stored them in less mentionable body crevices. When your survival depends on dry strings, dignity is secondary. Regarding armor, archers were less heavily equipped than other soldiers. Most wore quilted jackets weighing 10 to 15 pounds, akin to fighting while encased in a mattress. However, even the most robust individuals needed to maintain forward movement. Medieval warfare was not about arriving for a scheduled battle. It was about enduring the journey there. The day commenced before sunrise with no coffee or energy drinks, just cold water and stale bread, if one was fortunate. Fires were often prohibited in enemy territory, meaning breakfast was as cold as one's spirits. Then came the march, sometimes 20 miles a day, occasionally 30, carrying 80 pounds of gear. Roads were more like muddy tracks with aspirations of being actual roads. Paved highways were rare, so armies trudged through dirt paths, open fields, and routes designed to cause injury. The footwear situation was dire. Archers typically had one pair of thin-soled leather boots, definitely not waterproof. When these wore out, replacements were whatever was available, including cloth wrappings or scavenged leather. Some hardened their feet in advance by walking barefoot on gravel or rubbing them with salt and vinegar. Weather turned everything into a nightmare. Summer meant heat stroke, winter meant frostbite, and rain meant misery for all. Sleep was a luxury unless you were nobility. Most archers slept on the ground, wrapped in cloaks hoping insects wouldn't prey on them. Food consisted of hard bread that required soaking to be edible, dried meat tougher than armor, and foraging, a polite term for taking whatever sustenance could be found. By the time they reached the battlefield, archers were already half dead. Unfortunately for their enemies, that made them twice as dangerous. Archers were not merely individuals with bows. They were highly trained specialists operating with the precision of medieval artillery units. Their formations transformed battlefields into vast screaming pincushions. Every detail was meticulously planned: terrain, wind, direction, sun position, and enemy movements. Archers did not stand in straight rows. They formed a slight curve, not for aesthetics, but to make their arrows converge on targets from multiple angles. This expanded the killing zone, making evasion nearly impossible. A skilled archer could lose 10 to 12 arrows per minute. 100 archers meant over 1,000 arrows per minute. At Agincourt, 6,000 English archers participated, meaning they could rain down 60,000 arrows a minute. That is not a battle, that's a weather report. But this wasn't random firing. Against infantry, volleys came in continuous waves. Against cavalry, archers planted sharpened stakes while aiming at both riders and their terrified mounts. Arrows were lethal. A war arrow from a longbow reached speeds of 160 feet per second and could penetrate 4 inches of oak. Chainmail might as well have been a t-shirt. Even plate armor had vulnerable points. Communication relied on flag signals, horn blasts, and drums. Wind, rain, and terrain were calculated meticulously. Crosswinds required formation adjustments. Rain necessitated aiming adjustments. A narrow battlefield meant the enemy was compressed, like a human sandwich. Yet, when enemies closed in and arrows ran out, archers were forced into close combat. Secondary weapons were often inadequate against knights. Daggers, mauls, or modified bows offered little protection. Survival depended on skill, courage, and luck. Injuries were common, and medieval battlefield medicine was crude at best. Arrow wounds, infections, and amputations were frequent. Pain management relied on alcohol or opium if available. Financially, archers earned roughly 6 pence per day during campaigns, twice the average laborer's wage, but this barely covered necessities. Payment was irregular. Profitable spoils often came from battlefield salvage. During peacetime, archers maintained skills without pay, often taking seasonal work or exhibition practice. Injury compensation was minimal. Retirement planning was largely non-existent. Socially, archers occupied a liminal space, respected in war, tolerated in peace, but rarely fully integrated into society. Nobles viewed them with grudging appreciation. Common folk often feared their battlefield behaviors. Church doctrine complicated matters further, condemning missile weapons against fellow Christians. Women viewed archers as skilled providers, yet unreliable long-term partners due to frequent absences and high mortality. Children both admired and feared them. Ultimately, archers existed between worlds. Respected in war, marginalized in peace, their lives demanded endurance, skill, and courage beyond ordinary limits. Their legacy survives not in wealth or titles, but in the sheer mastery of their craft. So, do you believe you have what it takes to be a medieval archer? If so, congratulations, you possess more grit than most knights who ever wore elaborate armor.